Story 1. The Doll's Secret. When my wife was pregnant with our second child, we discussed that our current apartment wouldn't have enough space once the baby arrived. We decided to move into a larger house before buying one. After looking at several houses, we made our choice. I found a house built for one family. I heard from people at the real estate company that the original owner sold it to the current owner at a very low price because he was eager to immigrate. The current owner bought the house but never moved in. After being sent abroad by the company, his whole family went to live overseas, so the house was rented out. The house had a small courtyard, plenty of space, and the rent was within our budget. My daughter also loved the house, so we decided to rent it. On the first day of moving, my wife and I started packing. I took some things up to the second floor where we planned to store debris. When I opened the door to the storage room, I noticed something on the windowsill. A doll was sitting there. I remembered that the doll was there when I viewed the house. Although I had told the real estate agent to get rid of it, I think he may have forgotten. I found the doll quite cute, so I decided to let it stay. After my wife and I tidied up, we started a happy new life in our new home. However, one day, after coming home from work and taking a shower, I found my daughter had already fallen asleep. I sat down with my wife to watch TV when she suddenly told me she had discovered something strange. I asked what it was, and she explained that our daughter had been playing with a doll lately and had even named it XiaoXiang. It was a doll my wife had never seen before. She described it to me, and immediately, I thought of the doll on the windowsill upstairs. I figured it was just her playing with it, so I didn't pay much attention and told her it must have been left by the previous owner. But my wife mentioned that, originally, she hadn't thought much of it. She just assumed our daughter liked the doll. One day, though, she asked our daughter why she didn't usually look at it. Our daughter responded that she slept with the doll, but every time she woke up, XiaoXiang would be sitting on the second floor windowsill, waiting for her. Hearing this made my wife feel a bit uneasy, but she dismissed it as just our daughter's imagination. However, 2 days ago, my wife saw our daughter sleeping with the doll in her arms, but the next morning, she found the doll missing. She went to the utility room on the second floor and found it sitting on the windowsill. I listened to my wife, incredulous. I thought, how could this be? Our daughter was timid and usually needed us to accompany her to the bathroom at night. I suspected my wife had seen it wrong, but she insisted that just moments ago, our daughter had been holding the doll while she slept. Why don't we go take a look now? We walked to the room and found that the doll was indeed not with our daughter. So we headed to the utility room on the second floor and opened the door. To my surprise, the doll was sitting on the windowsill. My wife thought it was strange. She suggested we hide it, but since I had a holiday coming up, I wanted to observe it first. I reassured her that we should watch it for now. The next day, our daughter played with the doll as usual. That night, I picked up the doll and hid it high above the cupboard. However, the morning after, our daughter ran down from the second floor holding the doll. I was shocked. I asked her where she had found it. She told me that XiaoXiang had been sitting on the windowsill waiting for her, and that XiaoXiang also said she liked playing with her. Feeling unsettled, my wife and I decided to seal the doll that night. After our daughter fell asleep, I placed the doll in a cardboard box and sealed it with tape, hiding it deep in the cupboard. We pressed other boxes on top of it to keep it concealed. Early the next morning, before our daughter woke up, I went up to the utility room on the second floor and saw the doll sitting on the windowsill again, looking out the window. This situation was starting to creep me out. As I walked closer, I wondered why it always had to sit there. Then I noticed that the doll's posture seemed to be facing the corner of the yard rather than looking outside. I opened the cupboard and saw where I had placed the doll the night before. The smaller cardboard box was broken, and the larger box had a big hole in it. No matter where we hid the doll, it always ended up back on the windowsill facing the corner of the yard the next day. This continued for a week. One day, while I was playing with our daughter and the doll, I asked her, "Do you know why XiaoXiang always sits by the windowsill?" She replied, "Because she is looking for something." "Do you know what she is looking for?" Our daughter just shook her head, but my wife and I were genuinely worried and scared. We decided to burn the doll. That night, after confirming our daughter was asleep, we burned the doll in the yard. I wrapped the burned remains in a garbage bag and put it in the corner of the yard. The next morning, my wife and I were suddenly awakened by our daughter. She told us about XiaoXiang's parents and insisted that we find them. After speaking, she led us to the yard. We watched as she went to the corner, took the garbage bag containing the doll, and started digging in the soil with a toy shovel. My wife and I silently watched her dig for a long time. After a while, our daughter suddenly said, "You must be very lonely here." At that moment, I felt uneasy, thinking about what the doll had left in the garbage bag. I saw her pushing the soil aside with her hands, and then she dug something out. Turning around happily, she held up a small skull. "Look, I found XiaoXiang," she exclaimed. This story happened when I was in college. To get into college, I needed to study in a big city. My parents agreed to help me pay the rent, but I had to cover my living expenses myself. One day, my father and I went to that city to look for a house. We visited a real estate company. After listening to several properties introduced by the agent, I realized that most of the cheap houses were dilapidated and lacked sunlight. My father wanted me to live in a better place, but to avoid increasing the burden on my family, I decided to accept the reality and regarded the harsh environment as a form of training. While browsing through the listings, I discovered an apartment that the agent had overlooked. The apartment looked brand new and was inexpensive. I immediately told the agent I wanted to see it, and we set off. The apartment was located in a relatively rural area, about a 40-minute ride from the suburbs to the school. Still, it was new, and the nearby amenities were convenient, so I decided to rent it. I moved in a week before school started. After settling in, I found that I was the only tenant on the second floor. Only 3 households occupied the first floor. I assumed the low occupancy rate was due to the location being so remote. Once college life began, I had classes during the day and worked part-time at night. It was a fulfilling and busy schedule that left me exhausted almost every day. As time passed, the empty rooms in the apartment I lived in were gradually rented out. After I had lived there for almost a year, the last empty room was finally taken. However, as the apartment became fully occupied, I began experiencing ghostly encounters while sleeping at night. At first, I thought I was just overtired, but the occurrences became increasingly frequent. Until one day, I experienced another ghostly visit and fell asleep in that state, leading to a strange dream. In my dream, I was standing on a familiar street, the sidewalk outside my rented house, but the apartment I lived in looked old and strange. Lights were on in every room except the far right room on the first floor. I instinctively walked toward the room with the lights off, but every step I took filled me with an inexplicable fear. I felt cold and scared, not knowing what was causing it. When I reached the door, I sensed someone inside. I opened it curiously, and a strange, fishy smell wafted out. As I peered inside, I heard the sound of chewing. Through the dim streetlight, I vaguely saw a black figure squatting in the center of the room. I was curious about what it was eating, so I stepped closer, but just as I was about to enter, the door slammed shut in front of me. I woke up with a start, still hearing the echo of the door slamming. I thought, what a strange dream. A few days later, I dreamt of the same scene again, but this time, 2 rooms in the apartment had their lights off, including the one on the first floor. I went to the second room, and the rest of the dream played out similarly. This pattern continued, with the dream appearing every so often like a curse. Each time, the old apartment added a new room with its lights out, until one day, I dreamed that all the lights on the first floor were off. Finally, I made my way to the second floor. By that time, the fear that filled me had already transformed into determination. I felt a sense of certainty that this time, I would confront whatever was inside. I opened the door to the second floor. This time, the door didn't slam shut. Instead, I saw a pale figure standing in the room. It looked at me with empty eyes, and the smell of decay filled the air. I stood frozen, unable to move. The figure pointed towards the window, and I instinctively turned to look outside. The view outside was bizarre. It didn't match the real-life scenery outside my apartment at all. Suddenly, I felt something clutch my leg. I turned back, and the figure was gone, but a rotten hand was gripping me tightly. In a panic, I kicked it away. I ran out of the room and slammed the door behind me, waking up in a cold sweat. That night, I decided to take action. I sought advice from seniors at my school who had experienced similar issues. They suggested finding out about the history of the apartment. I checked the property's background and learned that the building had been constructed years earlier, and there had been a fire that claimed many lives. I learned more about the fire that had taken place on the first floor years ago, resulting in the deaths of 3 people. I was horrified. After uncovering this information, I could no longer bear staying in that apartment. I gathered my things and moved out the next day, hoping to escape the lingering terror. Even now, whenever I think back on that experience, a chill runs down my spine.